And now poop gets real. Delete button. Let's do it. How do we do it? Never mind making the button even work. How do we even add the button? Create element. We've done it over and over. We're old pros at this. All right. No prob. So handle submit calls render item. Render item does all this stuff. It appends some spans to the LI. So it should probably also add the delete button. Let's make it so. Yeah.
Does that really, does it matter to put it in there? Because I made a separate function.
No, that's totally cool.
Okay.
That seems very appropriate. All right, const delete button. Why not? Document.create element button. I'm going to go ahead and give it a class to differentiate it from other buttons because I anticipate wanting to make it look different. So delete button dot class list dot add. How about delete? Sure. It needs to say something. So delete button dot text content. I'll just put del in there for now. Need to make sure it ends up on the page. So item dot append child. Delete button. Hey, there it is. Cool. But it does nothing. How can we make it do a thing? Add an event listener, indeed. All right. Delete. You can. I like add event listener better for a few reasons. Again, the old issue of you can overwrite onClick accidentally because it's just a property. So if you assign it a new function, it's going to get rid of whatever the property was before. Basically, it's just an older syntax. Add event listeners new, so I like it more. Consistency mostly. OnClick is fine though; it does totally work. And in some respects, is actually more like what we'll do in React. So, add event listener. What are we listening for? We're listening for a click. What do we want to do? Oh, something like this dot remove spell, which doesn't exist yet. Let's make it exist. Remove spell, colon, function. Don't forget my comma, because I will totally forget my comma. It's an event handler, so I know I'll be passing an event. I probably don't need to prevent default, because it's just a button. It's not inside a form, and buttons don't do anything by default. So, good to know the event is there, though. Let's just console log here, just so I can be sure that I even made this much work. Deleted. Deleted. Not true, though. It's not deleted. So what should I do in there? What'd you do? Yes.
I did something really hacky, and I think I sort of covered this with somebody else, but it was like you do this dot parent node dot delete child, and then you call the button.
Okay. So why does this work?
Because you're talking about like the element that you're currently inside of.
So what is this? What is this most of the time in here? What is this?
The calling object.
So it's the object most of the time. So what you did was this removed this dot parent something?
Yeah.
So what do you think this was when you did that?
I had no idea.
Okay, it was the event target.
Okay.
Because inside an event handler, this is the event target. So if this is the event target, then you could get the parent, which would mean you've got the button, and then the parent of the button is the LI. So that's kind of why that worked. So since we like to bind this differently anyway, I would generally go with event.target if you need to get that thing instead of using this, because a lot of times this will be bound differently. But yeah, that works. Yeah.
Entry list, so like the list of things, the list of list items that we had, do remove child, call remove child.
Okay, call remove child on the list. So we need to get the list. How do we get the list? How do I get the list? No query selector allowed. I heard parent node again, but we're not going to use this. We're not going to use this, and we're not going to use the other thing. We could still use event target, right? So let's say const button would be the event target, right? So the list is the parent. What'd you use? Parent node or parent element? Okay, they're both a thing. Parent node, parent element. They both get the parent. So looking at the DOM here on the Elements tab. So at any point in the tree, the parent node is the one level up, right? So the parent of this button is this list item. The parent of that is the UL, etc. So the parent node of this is actually the item, right? The parent of that would be the list. So we could do that. We could say list equals item dot parent node or something. This is a bit too much traversal for me. Yeah.
You already have item declared as a const later on.
Not inside this function,
Okay, so
right? So const is always going to make it, even var does this. So this is going to be a local variable inside here. Yeah. I want the li. I'm in the button. Right now, the li happens to be the button's parent. I don't know that I'm going to keep my HTML structure this identical forever. But what I do know is that the button's definitely going to be inside the li, and my li is definitely going to have a class of spell. So what I want is a method that lets me kind of do what query selector does, but backwards. Look up the page, look up the tree for a particular selector. I want to find an ancestor of my current element that has a class that I'm looking for. There is just such a thing. Let's see, let's find it. It is called closest. It returns the closest ancestor of the current element or the element itself, which matches the selectors given him the parameter. In other words, it does what query selector does, but it looks at the current element and every parent or grandparent, etc. of that element. So I want to look up the tree, given the button. It may be the parent, it may be the grandparent, I don't know. But what I know for sure is that if I look up the tree from button, it's going to have a class of spell. Does that make sense? And then I need to remove it from its parent. I heard remove child. So one thing I know for sure is that parent node here is definitely going to give me item's parent, so it should be able to remove child item. It kind of makes it silly that you have to even do that, but yeah, go up to go down, but there it is. There is just item.remove, but the browser support isn't quite there. So remove child has browser support, so we'll use remove child. So this removes it from the DOM. We still need to remove it from the array. So we potentially need to remove it from the middle of the array, right? So how do we remove from the middle of the array based on yesterday's examples? Splice, right? So the array is this dot spells dot splice. Syntax is first argument is the index to remove it from. Second argument is the number of items to remove. That should be a 1. So how do I find which index? Index of. So this dot spells dot index of what? My array has those objects in it though, not the LIs. You could. That's not my preferred solution because that's a lot. The LIs are just presentation. Like our real data is just, that's a lot more data than we would need to store. What would be cool is if we could actually pass the spell as an argument to remove spell. So that I could just like do that. Is it possible? Also, hey friends, guess what? This dot spells not going to be a thing, right? This is an event handler. How do I overcome this? Yeah, but what about the arrow? I like the arrow. The arrow is my friend. I could bind this. Ooh. Like so. That should do that thing. Yeah. How do I get the spell in there? How'd you do it? How'd you make it work? What's that?
So like you said this dot remove spell dot find this. After remove spell, put open parentheses.
But then I'm going to actually execute the darn thing, right? So how do I pass arguments in without executing it on the spot? I can think of 2 ways, one of which I haven't taught you yet. Put it inside the button. How do you mean? Oh, like put the spell details, like attach it to the DOM? Yeah. I really want to pass an argument into remove spell, but dagnabbit, it's my event handler. Make another function? Yeah? Why do I like that? What do I mean?
Because you need one to handle the event, and you also need one to be able to pass it like arguments.
So where do I put it? Like right there? What if I did this? Yeah, what if I did this? Then call this dot remove spell. Then I could pass the spell in parentheses, right? Yeah.
Can I ask just what is the equal sign and then the arrow? Like what does that do?
It says, hey, this is a function. It's some other languages use that as syntax for an anonymous function or a lambda, which is just a fancy word for anonymous function. So in particular, there was a language called CoffeeScript, which compiles down to JavaScript, and it did this trick with this before JavaScript did it natively. So they kind of borrowed that syntax from there. So we could do that, or we could go back to using bind. Extra feature of bind. It does more than just, I'm going to start putting this on multiple lines. So the first argument to bind will be the value of this inside that function. Any additional arguments we pass to bind will be passed as arguments to that function. So if I want to pass some arguments to remove spell, I can pass them as arguments to bind. And any other arguments that get passed in, like the event, will always be at the end. Do I need to repeat that? It's a big sigh. So we know that bind, the argument that you pass into bind, that will be the value of this inside that function, right? So one thing to note is that bind returns a new function. So you call bind on a function, and it returns a copy of that function now with this new value of this attached. If you pass additional arguments to bind, they will be passed as arguments to that function automatically. So bind will return a new copy of that function, but this time with this value of this attached and with these arguments coming along for the ride. The complication here is this is already getting arguments, right? It's already getting that event because it's an event handler. So any other arguments that are getting passed will come at the end. So the event will be the last argument in the list. Any that we put inside bind will be at the beginning. So spell will now be passed in here alongside the event. Let's see if that's all true. It did delete, so something good happened. Let's fire, sleep, miscellaneous, app.spells. There we go. Let's delete sleep. And it deleted the right one. So since I had the spell object in there, I could just use index of to find it, and then use splice at that index to remove one item. You dig? Add a working... let me make sure that's all I did. Let's not commit just yet. Let me do one more thing. Let me make it prettier. Or let's make it delete-ier. It's not very delete-y right now. Needs more red. Index CSS. This was a button with a class of delete. So let's make the background color RGB. So all the way red and a little bit of the other two. So it's not quite so eye burning. And I think white would look good against that background. How's that? That's much delete-ier. I like it. Add a working delete button. Cool. So everybody get how array splice works? Those of you who popped it off the end, you see why it didn't work?